Welcome to Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, or CXC 2021. Our 4-day celebration of cartoon art couldn't happen without our partner organizations, to whom we are grateful. CXC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our annual festival, free to the public, relies on corporate and grant support, as well as individual donations. We are grateful for their support. Visit the Support CXC link on our website to find out how you can help us create meaningful connections between the people who make comics and those who read them. Cartoon Crossroads Columbus acknowledges that the ancient ancestors of the Eastern Woodlands tribes, now referred to as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, inhabited the land we know as Ohio. Their descendants include the living nations of the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandot, Delaware, and Seneca Cayuga. We honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this place where we gather. We hope you enjoy this event. Don't forget to visit our virtual expo at cartooncrossroadscolumbus.org and keep the conversation going in our Discord channel, which you can find at cartooncrossroadscolumbus.org/discord.
Hello, my name is Mike Cavender. I'm here on behalf of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, and today we have Eisner and Harvey Award winning comics creator Chris Samnee with us. Hi, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was something that like the main thing that strikes me about your work is your ability to convey motion, which I think is a really underrated aspect of comics. And when I'm reading your books, like it's almost like my eyes are getting pulled across the page by the movement that's inferred, which is hard to do, with static images. So I wondered if maybe you could talk about your approach and how you convey motion in your work.
Well, I got my start reading comics before I started in comics. I was really into animation, so I think a lot of that sort of filters into how I draw comics. Like the motion of the characters is really important, and the through line from panel to panel. I'm just trying to get as much across with a static image as you would be able to in animation. So they're almost storyboards, but I think a lot of the implied motion is from the composition, and I try to lead the eye from one panel to the next in like a Z shape. So if I can lead your eye, it's just a little trick to try and make your eye go from left to right in each panel, and then back around again to the next tier down. I'm just trying to trick the reader into following where I want them to.
Another thing that's kind of part of that too is the tension that you can create with this implied motion. Like I'm thinking, for instance, of the fight scene. I think it's in volume 2 of Firepower, when the ninjas kind of break into Owen's house, and he's trying to keep everybody from waking up. And I think it's when he's in the bedroom, in him and his wife's bedroom, and there's a water bottle on the
Right.
on the nightstand there, and it's kind of tilting like this, and like you can almost feel yourself like wobbling with it.
Yeah.
And I really love that scene. And then the other thing that I'm thinking of too is in the first issue of Jana, that's kind of a different, not so much tension, but another kind of stylistic trick where she's turning this or she's opening up the tent, I think, to leave. Mm-hmm. And it's like she's pulling the last page for you to open up on that splash page. It's really well done stuff.
Thank you.
Was that you? I know that Jana obviously was you and your wife. Was Kirkman involved with the bottle, or was that something that you had thought up?
No, that was all in the script. I think, gosh, it's been a long time since I worked on that.
Sure.
I'm on issue 18 now of the series, and then we had the prequel OGN was like 6 issues worth. So I'm like years away from from the issue from back then. I'm pretty sure it was in the script with the water bottle stuff, but it was just like, it definitely helped with the tension. Honestly, with Kirkman's script, most of the time he even says like big panels, little panel, big panel, and then it's just up to me to come up with the composition. But it's just sort of like that, Hitchcockian thing where there's like a ticking time bomb going off, on in the same time that you're worrying about the main conflict. Something else is happening in the background.
Right.
So it was trying not to wake her up and fight the ninjas, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out. But it's been so long since I did it that I think the only reason I can like it now is because I've forgotten the actual making of it.
Right. Well, so something else I wanted to talk about is some of the detail that's in your work. I noticed besides motion, what really draws me to your work is body language. But I noticed, like in something like in Thor, the Mighty Avenger, or in Jana, the body language is it's more simplified, I guess, than something like Black Widow or Daredevil. And I was wondering if that's a conscious decision, like is Jana and Thor aimed at all ages, and so the body language is meant to be a little simpler, or is it, I guess, just a stylistic choice?
I think it's more of like the tone of it depends on how far I can push the acting. With Black Widow, I wanted it to be sort of a spy thriller, so their acting in that is more subdued. They're not using their hands as much, and it's not as over the top, sort of cartoony acting as you would get. I feel like with Thor and Jana, a lot of that is big, cartoony, almost like stage acting. You're playing for the back of the crowd. Whereas with Black Widow, it's a big screen stuff, and things can be a little more subdued.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there are giant explosions and stuff in Black Widow, so maybe maybe I'll have to go back and look at that again.
Sure. So I know you've mentioned in the back of Jana, for instance, that old Hanna-Barbera cartoons, influenced creature design. Super Friends led to your interest in comics. Looking at your Superman, I haven't seen it, and I haven't read every interview with you, but I was wondering if the Fleischer cartoons came into play at all in your kind of realization of Superman.
Oh, for sure. Those squinty eyes and the everything about it, just the whole aesthetic of the serials, I just loved to bits. I just did a variant for Superman 78, and Superman's holding up some robots, and it's the robots from Mechanical Menace from the Fleischer cartoon.
Yeah,
sort of a mixing of my two favorite Superman periods. It's the Fleischer cartoons and Superman 78.
Excellent.
I love that stuff.
Also, besides animation too, I've read a lot about your appreciation for comic strips. Could you maybe talk about how you incorporate that element into your work and how that maybe differs from traditional comic book illustration?
I think the heavy black spotting that I have in a lot of my work is from reading a lot of black and white strip art, and a lot of 1980s indie comics, honestly. But yeah, for the most part, I really love Alex Toth's work, and I found Frank Robbins through him, and Noel Sickles, and I really got into Terry and the Pirates, and I really love the black and white stuff. So there's a lot more black on a page with my work. I feel like, honestly, just because it's so ingrained in the language of comics in the back of my mind, that I feel like if it's getting shrunk down to a postcard size or a postage stamp size in a newspaper, has to be, the black and white balance has to be perfect. And I'm trying to channel as much of that as I can on a comic page, even if it is going to be big. Where it started was from strips.
Okay. Do you have any aspirations to work in comic strips or animation or web comics even?
I've done some work in animation. I've done some character designs, and I worked at Pixar for just a little bit on a movie that ended up not happening, but it was a great time working on it. I don't really have any aspirations to work in strips, just because I can scratch that itch in comic books. When I was younger, I thought maybe that could be a path that I would travel down. I used to do a weekly newspaper strip for my hometown newspaper when I was in high school, and that lasted like a year. And I think the newspaper isn't around anymore, but also I was in high school and I had no idea what I was doing. But I think comics are probably it for me in that that's my preferred way of telling stories. I'd love to do more cartoons, but strips, I feel like they're hard to get into people's hands anymore. You can do online strips, and that might be an avenue at some point. But I feel like it's really hard for people to read newspaper strips. They just keep getting smaller and smaller in the Sunday funnies.
I've read the web comics that I've read. They seem like they take their cues more from news strips, maybe more so than traditional comics. And then even in like an indie comics, like the kind of memoir graphic novels, they seem to take their cues from news strips. I guess I'm not sure where I was going with that. I was just, but I guess we've talked about animation and comic strips. So I wanted to see maybe if you wanted to talk about who some of your heroes were, who got you into comics, like when you first realized that there were people that, like real people, that were making these books.
I started out buying Batman comics, and that was pretty much it for me for the first few years. I would buy anything Batman, and then I got from Batman into Teen Titans, and somehow or other I bought some back issues of Comics Interview, and Jim Aparo had an interview in it, and he said that Milton Caniff was a big influence on him. And I just sort of fell down the rabbit hole trying to figure out who was influenced by who, and travel back as far as I could, because with Milton Caniff, I got really hooked on Terry and the Pirates, and through Milton Caniff, I found Frank Robbins, and a lot of their thick, brushy stuff has influenced my work. Alex Toth, Frank Robbins, Milton Caniff, those are my top guys. There's more beyond that. Noel Sickles, I love his old, before he became a proper painter, I was really into, now I've lost it. What strip did he do? It's too late in the day, and I haven't had enough coffee.
Fine.
But yeah, those are some of my top guys. But in the 90s was when I really started getting into newspaper strips, just because as everyone else started getting into the image stuff, even if I work there now, that stuff really wasn't clicking for me. And it's embarrassing to say now almost that, but in the
completely different company now, I would say,
yeah.
Almost unrecognizable from that stuff.
For sure. But during the image boom, when McFarlane and all those guys were getting huge, and I kind of dipped out of comics and started reading more newspaper strips. My grandma bought me a giant collection of Dick Tracy, and I read that thing until it fell apart. And from there, I would just go to the library and try and find whatever newspaper strips they had at the library, and I would just borrow it and trace it and try and learn from it that way.
So when you were first starting out, did you try to emulate people that you really liked, or was it something like where I want to draw, but I want to be different from these people?
I wish that I had better aspirations. Back then, I didn't think I was going to ink, for one. And I would just start tracing things. And most of my early drawings are just copies of Jim Aparo and Tom Mandrake and all those old, mid 80s DC artists. And by the the mid 90s, I really started getting into manga. So then I started copying Dragon Ball and whatever I could get my hands on back in the day. So there wasn't a ton of stuff that was being translated in the late 80s, early 90s. So it was mostly Ranma 1/2 and Area 88 and Battle Angel. There's I could get 10 different manga and I would just copy all of it. And the first work that I actually had published was manga stuff.
When you say you were tracing, were you just like laying like tracing paper over the top of something, or were you like looking and going back and forth?
I mean, a lot of it was copying, because I found that if I have a heavy hand, and I would end up messing up my comics as I was trying to trace them, so I ended up just copying most of it. It's really bad copies.
I'm
It's
sure not
harder
that bad.
tracing, and then I couldn't copy a really bad drawing.
Right. Would you mind telling us what your process is like? Do you have like a set schedule every day, or is it just kind of like depends on what else you have going on? I know you have a family, and that can impact things.
Well, the past couple of years has changed things up a little bit. Especially, I used to get up and get the kids ready for school, and then I'd go to the office, and I rented office space just down the street, and then I would come back after I was done with the day, and then I'd make dinner and get everybody ready for bed. Now that we can't keep popping in and out, I have my office space downstairs, and I get the kids ready in the morning, and then I head downstairs by about 9, and I start my day down here and work until lunch, and I come up and we get everybody fed for lunch, and then I come back down again and I work until 4, and then I go back up, and then we do baths and bedtime and dinners and everything, and then I come back down again at usually about 9, and I work from 9 to 11:30 or 12. And start
man.
It wouldn't be so hectic if I weren't working on 2 books, but since I'm co-writing and drawing one and then also drawing another, it means I end up having to work more hours. And it's not a 5-day-a-week job; it's more of like a 6 or 7-day-a-week job to keep on top of everything.
Yeah. Do you like to listen to music while you're drawing, like, or because I ask because I know sometimes people, like artists and stuff, or writers, they don't want like other work to kind of contaminate whatever it is that they have going on. I know I know it's different, but when I write, I like to be in silence, kind of.
Yeah.
I can't listen to anything else. How is it for you?
When I'm drawing, if I'm working on firepower and I'm not working on layouts, if I'm just working on inks, I can listen to audiobooks or whatever music I want to listen to, and that's totally fine. There's not a disconnect. But if I'm trying to do layouts and something that requires language, like if I'm writing on Jana or if I'm doing layouts, I can't have the voices in music with the voices in my head. It just sort of gets all mixed up. So for that sort of stuff, like if I'm writing on Jana or working on layouts, I'll usually listen to instrumental, or I have a playlist of Studio Ghibli soundtracks whenever I'm working on Jana that sort of puts me in the right headspace. And then if I have all the layouts already done, then I'll just listen to an audiobook or something.
So co-writing Jana with your wife, and the personalities of the leads are based on you have three daughters, correct? So the personalities of the 2 leads are based on your older daughters. Can you talk about how that impacts your approach to how you're writing, and how it's different from working on somebody else's script? Do you write a story first, and then you and your wife write the story and then go in and draw it, and then like Marvel style, or do you have like write out a full script?
And right now I'm starting on the 12th issue, and it's been different almost every issue. It's been a learning process. We're still trying to figure it out. I mean, we have kind of an idea of how we do it, but our schedules don't really sync up, because if I have the kids, then she's doing something, and vice versa. So whenever I'm working downstairs, then she's upstairs, and it's hard to try and get our schedules to match up so we can just sit down like on the weekend and just sit down and work like we used to at the beginning of things before, like pre-pandemic. So we did the whole outline together and all of the beats for each issue. And I think for just about the first 9 issues, we had the whole thing figured out for page by page. And then I would take our page by page breakdown, like each page, it's just like on this page, John punches a monster. On this page, this happens. And we would just go page by page, no dialogue or anything. And then I would come and work all of my layouts out from that. And then I'll show it to her, and then we do all the dialogue together. And sometimes that would work, and sometimes it would have to be more of I would sit with her and also working on really rough layouts, where it's even if they were just teeny tiny ones. Sometimes we would work on layouts that are, you know, an inch tall, and just to get the pagination right. And then I would take those and blow those up to a bigger size. And that seems to be the way that's working the best. It helps us more with the flow of the story. And I have a tendency to want to do a lot of 2-page spreads, and the 2-page spreads don't fit right where they need to if we end up needing an extra page here or there. So I can't be like, oh, but this needs to be a 2-page spread because and now it falls on an odd numbered page, and oh well, we need 2 more pages, and now we're at a 26-page issue, and then it's like, oh well, it's not budgeted for 26 pages, and then we have to like go back and edit things back. So what's working the best is we look at our original outline, we look at how many pages are in each issue, in the issue that we're looking at, where the page turns are all going to be, and then I take that and do the full size layouts from that, and then I'll show her what those look like with placeholder dialogue, and then I'll fix what needs to get fixed, and then we'll do another draft, and then we do final draft of script and turn that in, and we turn it in. The final draft of the script gets turned in with the layouts, so they don't have to see all the our editor doesn't have to see warts and all of here's this, but I also needed to change a couple of pages. And it's just like the script is pretty bare bones. A typical comic script says panel 1, this happens, and then you have the dialogue. It looks like a movie script, whereas ours is just like rainbow, Jana, sound effects, rainbow, Jana. There's like there's no panel description because it's all in the same. It's just 2 PDFs that have to be open next to each other.
Do you have any aspirations to continue to write more of your own stuff?
I've had a lot of fun on Jana, but I think once Jana's in the can, I'm gonna go back to just doing Firepower for a little bit. It's been a lot to try and do 2 books at the same time. I mean, it's a lot just to do 1 book and try and keep up with email. Mm-hmm. And so I think I have other ideas rattling around, but I'm not ready to pull the trigger on them yet until things get back to normal and we can get the kids vaccinated and we can try and get back to a regular working day.
Sure.
The days are getting longer.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have a philosophy about covers? Do you prefer like a certain style, like iconic or like symbolic or teasing something from the book? And would you maybe talk about how your approach to covers is different than interiors?
I think it depends on what happens in the issue. A lot of times it's fun to do something that sort of teases, but I'm always worried that I'm going to spoil something, like give too much away. And whenever I get a note from an editor that just says, make it cool, make it iconic, it's too much pressure. That's usually the ones that I bomb the first try. There were a few times on Daredevil where they're like, oh, well, we're starting with a new #1, so do something iconic. And it's like, okay, I'll try. And I did one way back on, I think it was our second, it would be volume 4. It was my first #1 on the series. And the note from our editor, Stephen Wacker, he was just like, oh, it's a new #1, make it iconic. And I got the layout approved, and then I inked it. And when I turned it in, he was like, oh, is that really what you're going to do? And I ended up having to do it a second time. And we used the original version of that for the artist edition of Daredevil that came out years later. Because I guess I just clammed up. And if I work for Marvel or DC, a lot of times they're like, just do an iconic image. And I think I prefer story related, but try not to do anything too teasy. Let's see. This is the volume 2 cover. It's hard to.
I can see.
This is of the second volume of Jana, and that's just like, oh, there's monsters, and Jana will fight them.
Yeah.
And it's just something fun, but not. It's wasn't leaning for iconic, just something like, hey, this will be fun and there's monsters.
Yeah.
And then I can do my arty sort of pieces for the back covers. Here's this, man, wait, this one right here is the back cover of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I can just draw like a hammer or a key and just something where I can put a ton of black on it and just make a fun little iconic image, something that like is symbolic of what happens in the issue without having made an image that isn't going to sell the book. They're just like a fun little afterword, like, hey, I finished this issue and here's my celebration. It's a ton of black and it's a key, or here's some skulls. And that's just been a fun exercise. I don't know that we need them, but I enjoy doing those.
And what do you think is different, like when you're doing that as opposed to interiors? Is there any difference in your process at all, other than it being like this iconic shot or not necessarily a part of the story proper? Is there any different approach there?
Well, with covers, you're trying to get something that if it's stacked on a comic shop, you're really only going to see the logo and a little bit below that. So it's really hard to try and sell just from the logo. So I'm shooting for the whole cover because you really don't have another option. But something that is going to stand out on a shelf, I do I jump back and forth from either a really dark cover or a really bright cover. It just depends on what hits the shelves that's going to be next to it that month. It's hard to get an idea of really what's going to pop. But I'm trying to do something that if your eye is moving across all the noise that's on a comic shelf, something that will stand out. And I'm trying something each month. We'll see. I don't know how well they jump off compared to other stuff, but I'm trying to get something that will hopefully catch somebody's eye as they're walking past it.
Are there any characters that you've yet to work on that you would like to get to, or are maybe you more interested now in staying in the creator-owned realm?
I am really enjoying creator-owned. I mean, there's always, a checklist of characters that I grew up on or I'd love a chance to draw at some point. I mean, Batman was always my number one guy. Batman and Superman is where I got my start. And I feel like at some point I'd like to do a proper run of Batman or Superman or Fantastic Four, my favorite superhero team. And I've worked on all of them, little things here and there. But I've never had a proper run. And, somewhere down the line, maybe that will be where things end up. But for right now, I'm doing Jana and Firepower, and I'm going to carry those until they end. And then we'll see what happens next. I'm trying not to plan too far ahead,
Sure. You got plenty of work right now already.
Yeah.
So
it's hard enough to worry about what's currently on my plate without trying to add whatever's going to happen next. I can't think about the dessert yet. I'm still in the main course.
Sure, I understand. So you always ink your own stuff, and I don't think many people really understand how much inking impacts the finished product. And I was wondering if you were ever interested in working with an inker. Is that something that would be creatively interesting to you? Like, say that you bring on somebody with like Bill Sienkiewicz or something that has like this really distinctive inking style. Is that something that you're interested in, or do you prefer to just you enjoy the inking and want to do it?
I do enjoy the inking, which is weird. I mean, as a kid, I always just thought I was going to be a penciler. And when I got my first work, they didn't have a budget for pencil or for an inker. And I had to learn on the fly on how to ink myself. But as I had absorbed so much over the years, I kind of figured out I used the wrong tools to begin with, but I eventually figured out how to do it. And now there's just no looking back. I mean, and also my layouts are kind of only for me, and I don't do pencils. So I feel like if I were to pencil for someone else, I'd just tense up and it would just end up being too stale for anybody to. I'd have to get somebody like Sienkiewicz or Kevin Nolan to come in and give it the energy that it needs, because all of the energy that I can put into my work, it happens in the ink stage. So, I mean, all of my layouts are traditional, and then I just blow those up to 11 by 17 and ink over that. So it's been too long since I penciled. I'm afraid that I would just be a really bad penciler for somebody else. I had a couple of jobs early on. My first work at DC was on a book called Checkmate, and they said, well, you can't ink yourself because nobody inks themselves to start with. That was the editor's line, that nobody inks himself to start. And then I had an inker, and they were like, "Oh, well, you can ink the next one." So it was just like the first issue. They said you couldn't do it, and then I don't know if it didn't work out or if it was just because I was like, "Can I please ink myself?"
Yeah.
I did 3 more issues, and then they did let me ink it. So, and then that was it. That was the last time I had an inker, and I think I don't know that I'm not a great inker, but I'm my best inker, just because I don't know how to pencil anymore.
Would you ever be interested in inking somebody else?
Maybe as like an experiment, just like as a cover or a single page or something. But I don't think that I have the patience to do inking over somebody's work for a whole issue. I mean, if it was, if some Kurt Swan pages showed up out of the blue and they were like, "Hey, we really need an inker for this," then yeah, I mean, sure, of course. But I don't think that there's anything nowadays that I would jump at trying to ink somebody else over. I mean, if it was, I think a while back they found like some Kirby pages that had never been finished. Like, then yeah, of course. Yeah. But I don't know that I would feel comfortable inking modern stuff. I can appreciate everybody's what they're doing now. I just don't know that there's a whole lot of guys that I would be able to ink over, guys or gals, that I would be able to use. I don't know how well my messy inks would work over somebody else's pencils. Sure.
What about coloring? Have you ever been surprised by how coloring changes your work?
Consistently. I always I always have an idea of what the colors are going to look like. And I've worked with Matt since like 2014. And Matt's almost exclusively been my colorist over the years. There have been a few books here and there. I did, like I said, Checkmate was with a different colorist. And I worked with Dave Stewart on some stuff at Dark Horse. But for the most part, Matt's been my go-to colorist. And I always have an idea of what I have in my head, but he always comes up with something different. But I'm always really happy with it. So it's never like, oh, well, this didn't come out the way I wanted. It always it comes out different, but it's always great.
I know you also keep all of your original art. Do you collect anybody else's, or is it just yours?
I've finally started getting rid of some of my stuff. I got rid of all of my most recent cap run, and there have been some covers I got rid of. I did a Shazam cover for DC, and I sold that. And I've sold some cover work, Marvel Zombies, and different things that I've done. I'm trying not to be so precious with all of my stuff. It's just piling up around here, and it has to go somewhere. So all of the creator-owned stuff that I do, all of the stuff that I've done with my wife, all the Jonna pages won't be going anywhere. And the stuff that I had to work so hard on, that like Black Widow, I won't be getting rid of, and Daredevil, just because I've spent 3 years of my life on Daredevil. I feel like if I look at those pages, I can remember what was happening while I was working on it. Or, my kid was born while I was working on this page in the waiting room. And those are all tied to life events. And some other pages aren't. Some other comics that I've worked on aren't so tied to things that I feel like they're not something that I need to keep around. But Jonna, I keep. And all of our variant covers for Jonna, any of them that were drawn to traditionally, I bought those from the artists, because those were all people that I handpicked to do variants for us. So Jay Stevens cover I bought, Ethan Young's cover I bought. We have a couple that haven't been announced for our last few issues. We have a big deal for issue 12, and we did an art trade but it hasn't been solicited, so I can't say who it is. But I'm
Sure,
really
sure.
excited about that one. But yeah, I own like half a dozen of those, the ones that weren't drawn digitally. And I collect. Let's see, it's mostly just random stuff here or there that I find at a convention or somebody that I grew up really enjoying. I honestly, I think I have the more Steve Rude pages than I have of anybody else. I have probably 6 pages of the Moth and a couple of Nexus pages. And I have a Guy Davis BPRD, and I have some other stuff rattling around. I can't think of what it is. I have one of Mike Allred's solo pages with Our Man. But yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of art that I collect, but I'm the #1 Jana art collector.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so I have all of the Jana art and all of the art that other people have done of it.
Okay. So you got into comics at a relatively young age. And so I wanted to see if there's anything that you would have done differently or what you might want to or what you would recommend to artists that are trying to break in right now.
What would I recommend?
Yeah.
Gosh. Like what books would I recommend, or what would I recommend on what to do for career-wise?
Yeah, career-wise.
I would say don't put off writing for yourself. Because I made up a lot of stories when I was a kid, and then would always think like I'm not good enough to write it, and I would just leave it be and think, well, I'll get to it somewhere down the line. And I wish that I'd put more of it on paper. And I remember having ideas for stuff, but I always just thought I wasn't good enough, or I'd get to it at a later date when I was better. And that would still be happening now if I didn't just pull the trigger. And at some point I had the idea for Jana and I wanted to do it. And I was like, well, I'll have to wait until I have time, after Firepower or when I have time. And it was always just putting things off. And my wife said, well, we can make it work if you do it. Just go ahead and we'll find the time. If you want to do it, it's something that is important, then we'll find the time and we'll make it happen. And it's been tough, but I'm so glad that we actually did. I mean, I'm kicking myself some days that it's like, oh, this is going to be another 20-hour day. But I'm glad that I have a chance to do something that is mine. And the timing worked out to where it's a book that our kids are enjoying. We're making it kind of about them, but it's also with them. And, getting little drawings from them before I start the day of characters that we've all made up is kind of everything that I could hope for. So just don't put it off. If you can find the time, just do it.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have for you here. And I want to thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks
everybody.
For having me. I really appreciate it.
Get Jana, get all the firepowers. Where's the camera at? There we go. And we really appreciate you coming on, and hope maybe you can make it to Columbus sometime.
I'd love to.
Come and visit. Yeah, visit us at the Laughing Ogre. Visit Billy Ireland. I'm sure they would love to have you there. But on behalf of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Have a nice night, guys. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
See you later.
So long.